Hey y'all! Well, we're ready to start doing testing on this little Musical Paradise amp, which I know is a really popular one online. First thing we're going to do is going to hook it up to the Analog Discovery 2 with the Audio Analyzer Suite, and we're going to do sweeps and look at the frequency response curve, the distortion profiles, see what kind of power it makes, and then we're going to swap around different tubes and see which tubes kind of sound or look like they should sound the best. And I know that I said I was going to go listen to this thing first, but my concern is that I don't want to go and listen to it with like say these metal RCA tubes and then spend hours like trying this tube and that tube and this other tube, and I've got a half a dozen or more output tubes that I can put in this amp, and I want to start my listening test from as good as this can make. Because like if it's one kind of input tube, this thing only makes a half a watt, and then I swap to another input tube and it's making 4 watts clean power, I don't need to go through all those fatiguing audio listening tests to try to figure out that when I can look at a screen and kind of weed out the combinations that absolutely don't work. And you know me, I'm fine with, listening to something that maybe has a little bit of harmonic distortion. That's kind of what tube amps are all about, is that good harmonic distortion. And so let's hook this thing up and start running some tests on it and see if we can find a complement of tubes that really makes this thing sing. And then in the next video, we'll do some listening impressions and like maybe how the headphone jack sounds and what the differences are with the different ways of hooking up headphones and speakers, and what different sources sound like through it and all that kind of stuff. So let's get busy testing. Okay, first I want to test this thing how it comes from the factory with the China tubes that come in these things. And we've got it hooked up to the Analog Discovery 2 with the Audio Analyzer Suite by The Stuff Made. And let's see what this thing does out of the box. It's actually looking pretty good. We've got under 1% distortion at 1 watt. 2 watts, we've got 1.6. 3 watts, we've got a little over 2.5. Then we've got a little dipsy doodle here. And this is probably about where it starts clipping, around 4 watts. So let's go over to our scope. And this would be 2 volts RMS in. And let's see. We're not quite hard clipping yet. Let's see what 2.2 does. It's getting a little fat here at the top, but I don't see like total hard clipping yet. Let's see what 2.5 or 0.25 RMS does. And there we're clipping. And you can see tube amps do have this kind of soft clipping where the edges are more round, but that's definitely clipping. So we'll go back here to our THD versus power and see where 2.5 volts RMS in, and looks like about 6 watts, which is pretty impressive. I haven't looked to see what they actually rate this at, but I'll put this up in the corner of the screen. So let's look at our THD versus frequency and see what kind of pattern we get here. And a little bit different story. On the other screen, we were checking it at 1K sine wave. And as you can see, when you get lower frequency than that, the distortion gets pretty nasty. Here at 100 hertz, we've got 5 and 6% distortion, depending on which channel you're looking at. Now the nice thing is, most of this distortion is second order harmonics. As you can see, when we go to third order, it drops down here much lower, especially down here in the lower registers. And I've actually got a pretty even mix of second and third order harmonics in the higher frequencies. And then when you do THD plus noise, it jumps up a little bit too. So we do have some noise going on, but it's not horrible. Here's the thing that I want to see is the frequency response, because this thing does have fairly small output transformers. And I have a feeling this is where we're going to see it struggle. Yeah, it's never a good sign when the frequency response curve starts off down here in this flat part. And as you can see, we've got quite a bit of low frequency roll off. It really doesn't flatten out till almost 1K. Because on this blue line, that's basically 0. We'll follow that one. We get down here to 100 hertz. We're down 1.5 dBs. And when we get down to 40, we're down 3.5 dBs. So the 3 dB roll off is right around 45 hertz, which that's some pretty serious low frequency roll off. And if you're looking for 20 hertz performance, it's non-existent. There's 8 dBs of roll off down at 20 hertz, which isn't shocking. Here at 20K, we've got 2 dBs, which I'm not concerned about at all. 10K, we've got about 0.5 dB, which still, that's not bad. So it's going to have a nice top end sound, but it's just not going to have any low frequency response at all. And so if we do this THD versus power, and let's try it at just 200 hertz and see what the story looks like. I know we don't normally test at this low a frequency on our audio analyzer suite pulls, but I do want to see what kind of power this thing makes at lower frequencies, and I don't think 200 hertz is like what I would consider a super low frequency. Might be something we start doing in the future on our amps tests, is doing this test at like 200 hertz in addition to 1K, because there is quite a bit of music down at 200 hertz. As you can see, the distortion profile is completely different when we're looking at 200 hertz. It's got 2% at 1 watt. It's got 3.5% at 2 watts. And it's got 4.5% at 3 watts. And I'm sure if we look at the same thing, it'd be interesting to see where the clipping point is at 200 hertz. It actually might be about the same point. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything super nasty here. So the last thing we want to do is, let's just take a look at the square wave at 1K, see what that looks like. Get a little bit of ringing. Not super flat, but it still looks like a square wave. And then 10K one is asking a lot of an amp. Let's see what it does. It's not beautiful, but it does actually look square. And I will say it looks a whole lot cleaner than like that Wilsonton R300 did. So bonus points for that. And again, when you look at the frequency response, I mean, it is a curve. It's not doing some kind of weird dipsy doodle trying to short out the outputs over here like we saw with that R300. So there's nothing tragically wrong, but yeah, it's just not going to have real good low frequency response. So let me pop some other tubes in it, and I've already done some of this testing, so maybe I'll go ahead and jump to the tubes that looked really good to me. So let me do that real quick. So let's go back to 1K sine wave test here. And what we've put in it is a pair of 6 SD7 GT Joint Army Navy tubes, which are some really cool looking mesh plate octal tubes. And then put a pair of Electroharmonic 6CA7s. The guy from Intuit that sent me this amp said he liked the way those sound. And I did test those versus my favorite EL34 tube right now is the JJ EL34-L, but we'll do some listening tests later on those two. But let me show you what it does with this complement of tubes. And as you can see, with this set of tubes, it hits 2 watts before it goes past 1% distortion. And then we have 1.5% at 3 watts, 2% at 4 watts, which in this range here, this amp's going to sound really good, except for the low frequency roll-off. I think that's what we're giving up at this price point, is even with these better tubes, it doesn't solve the low frequency roll-off issue, which is just a function of using really small output transformers, which they had to do to get them to fit inside this case. And it does pick up a little bit of performance on the bottom end using these better tubes. But as you can see, like in this range, it's nice and flat. And again, if you look at that blue number on the right, it's right there at 0 dB. When you get down here to 100 hertz, we're down 1 dB. The 3 dB roll-off is again around 38 hertz maybe. So we did pick up a little bit of low frequency response, but not much. And about 1 dB roll-off at 10K. So that's just a function of the output transformers. And again, when we do the THD versus frequency with this set of tubes, down at 20 hertz, we've got almost 25% distortion. It does seem to flatten out a little sooner, but it's got kind of a unique curve I haven't seen before, where the distortion picks back up on the top end, but it seems to have less distortion in this 200 hertz range. So one last time, let's do a test at 200 hertz and see what that looks like with this set of tubes, and see if we've got some improvement. And I would say we definitely picked up a lot of improvement at 200 hertz as far as distortion, going with this set of 6 CA7s, and mainly it's these 6 SD7 GT tubes. And you can see it's definitely got a lot nicer THD versus power at 200 hertz using this other set of tubes. And I do want to show you one last thing, that these driver tubes really are critical. And so I've got a pair of RCA 5693s, but I've also got a pair of Sylvania 6SJ7 GTs, which Sylvanias are usually really nice tubes. And so I want to show you the difference in changing the driver tubes. And all these tubes are listed as being compatible with this amp. So let me pop these in and do one last pull here. And we'll probably just do this one at 1K and not repeat all these other tests, because the frequency response doesn't really change. And the THD versus power is where we're going to see most of the change swapping these driver tubes. So we're leaving the same output tubes in, and we're just putting a pair of these Sylvania 6SJ7 GT tubes in. And again, I haven't watched my partner in this endeavor, MKIII review of this amp to see which tubes he said he liked. I do remember he said he liked these Electro-Harmonix 6CA7s. And again, I did a test session earlier, and changing to the JJEL34Ls and several other tubes really didn't change the THD versus power curve. And so let's see what this thing does swapping in these Sylvania tubes. And in my honest opinion, this amp does not like these tubes. You're already at 1% distortion just right out of the gate. And we're going past 2% distortion, and we haven't even got to 1 watt. And here we are at 3% distortion at 1 watt. And then when we get up here to 2 watts, it's 4% distortion. So these are not the tubes that I would think, at least, are going to sound good in this amp, even though they say that they are compatible. So the other thing I'm going to do real quick is come back here and do the test at 1K, and you can see even at 1K it's struggling. We're almost 2% distortion at 1 watt. At 2 watts we're at 2.5. So these don't look like an ideal tube for this amplifier. And again, this is why I wanted to do this testing before we started listening to this thing, is I didn't want to waste a bunch of my time, critically listening to this amp and maybe comparing it to another amp with a set of tubes in it that clearly aren't optimal for the design of the amp. So the last thing I'm going to do is pop in these little metal RCA tubes, which are really cool looking tubes. They're these red bodied ones, and they're 5693s, just to show you what these do. And we're just going to run this one at 1K as well. And you can see we're basically going to get the identical results that we got out of the 6 SJ7 GTs, possibly a little worse. And I know when I was playing with my 6 SQ7 amp, the metal tubes that I tried they just didn't sound very musical. They didn't sound good. And the glass tube ones always sounded better. So this looks like another miss as well. So this looks like a good place to wrap up this first video. Again, the tubes we're going to do some listening testing with on the front end are going to be these JAN 6SD7 GTs. And the other kind of quirky thing was when I swapped back in the China front end tubes that we did the first test with, they performed just like these other tubes that aren't working well. I think what's going on is the 6CA7 EL34 power level tubes are harder to drive, and they just stress those driver tubes too much. And that's probably what we're seeing with all of these tubes, where for whatever reason this 6SD7 has more drive capability and it's probably going to be the best sounding of the bunch. So I'm going to go do some listening tests, and like I said, I think this is a great place to wrap up this video. Well, as you can see, looks like we found a good set of tubes as a starting place to do some listening tests to, and want to see what this thing sounds like out of the box with this set of tubes that we found. And then the next step is I want to measure the voltages inside it, start looking at load lines for these tubes to see if I feel like they're being operated in an optimum place. I know there's mod videos out there about people pulling caps out and swapping other stuff around, and we'll see about all that. I do know that there may be some advantage to swapping to a LED resistor combo like I've done in a bunch of my amps. We'll see what all that's about. I don't know if we've got an issue with people trying to lower the gain on this thing so that then they can run some high gain preamp in front of it, because that, you see my videos and thoughts about all that kind of stuff. I feel like putting all that extra stuff in the signal path is not a good idea, and that may be what these folks are trying to do. This was sent by Intuit Reviews. Put the link below to their review of this in their channel. Go check them out. Go give them a sub. Appreciate him sending this over for me to listen to and review for you guys, and maybe do some mods on it. And, well, I'm probably going to do some mods on it. But anyway, I feel like we're at a good starting point. And, yeah, let's keep going with this little amp that seems to be a popular little guy on the internet. So if you're enjoying this video or you want to see more about this little amp, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Thanks all of you folks that have subscribed to the channel. They're regular viewers. Thanks to you folks that make donations either through Patreon or through my website. I really appreciate that. And especially you folks that send me this gear to look at and be able to showcase on the channel. Gives great content, allows you guys to learn more about this stuff, and hopefully we can both learn how to make this better than it comes out of the box, because that's what we do at Skunky Designs. So until the next video, have a nice day.